develop an indigenous startup ecosystem. And very simply, what does it mean? If India is a country that has exported, if not millions, but hundreds of thousands of engineers all over the world, and well-respected engineers who work, and if this country has produced talent which is part of almost all startup ecosystems in the rest of the world, how can we get that going? Why is it necessary to have an ecosystem for startups? What is the policy framework that should exist in a country like ours, and what is possible for it to be there? What are the imperatives for getting funding, because ultimately it all boils down to money? And then that famous Bollywood line, "Mere paas maa hai," but if we were to sort of contextualize it with the startup ecosystem, "Mere paas bhi apna Google hai." Stuff like that. So without any further ado, I'm going to request Paddy, who is somebody who's very influential in this space, the founder of the Web Summit, to start off, and then we'll quickly go across to the other gentlemen. Paddy, over to you.
Great. So just for a tiny bit of context, I organize what's become the largest startup conference in the world. It's not organized in Silicon Valley, it's organized in Dublin, Ireland, which is the 55th largest city in Europe. And in some ways it's a testament to the fact that what started happening in Silicon Valley many decades ago has now become a globalized phenomenon. But just to return to Silicon Valley for a moment before we go full circle. Having spent a great deal of time there over the last half a decade and more, I think if you honestly ask many of the CTOs of the most important technology companies in the world that have emerged out of this part of the world, they'll tell you that the secret weapon in whether it's San Francisco or in Palo Alto on most engineering teams is an Indian engineer. They are, for whatever reason, I'm sure you know the reasons, incredibly prized the world over. And there's been a long tradition that many of the best and the brightest engineers that have emerged out of the IITs in this country have left. And now you see them not just being the CTOs of some very important companies like Cisco until recently with Padma, but also the CEOs of some of the most important technology companies in the world. I think what you've seen in the last 3 years in particular is a stark turnaround or change. Not only, and this is our experience, and to provide at least a little bit of color, in 2011, for the first time, after 1 year of our event, some Indian entrepreneurs traveled to Dublin, Ireland. And one of them was the CEO of a very small e-commerce startup that nobody outside of India had a clue or had ever heard of this company, and it was called Flipkart. And Sachin was the first of a growing number of CEOs that started coming to our event. And over the last year in particular, the sheer volume of startups traveling to our conferences in Hong Kong, in the United States, which you facilitated, and to Europe has been quite phenomenal. And observing the fact that not only are some of the most talented engineers remaining in India and choosing to stay because they believe the opportunities now exist, many of those engineers that have spent decades abroad are, some at least, are returning, and I think that's a trend. I've listened to some amazing contributions. I've also had the privilege of going to many other countries around the world. And what I see in India is a pace of development in this sector that is unlike anything I've seen anywhere else. The only one that comes close, and it's pretty close, is China. And I almost feel, I know we're here to discuss what needs to be done, but if we all just walked away and said nobody was going to do anything more for startups in India, I think the sheer momentum is such that an enormous amount is going to happen over the next decade, irrespective of any more policies that are implemented.
And you're perhaps saying, let them be? It's going to develop.
No. I think there's an absolutely critical role that government can play, and anybody that says that government should just entirely step out of the way is probably not aware of the history of Silicon Valley. And the history of Silicon Valley is deeply, deeply intertwined with government through the National Science Foundation, DARPA, ARPA, with that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, without huge levels of funding and engagement in the United States involving the US government in Silicon Valley would never have come about. So there's a huge role that government can play. Those specific policies, I think many of them have been touched on already, and it's not really for me to say anything more than government has a big role to play.
You make absolutely great sense, and I would request our audience, also those who are watching this event, to take note of the fact, because there is sometimes a pushback from India that, you know, just step out of the way when it comes to the government and let us be. Perhaps it's partly justified, but like Paddy said, the foundation or the capital of all of this didn't happen without DARPA or ARPA. So there's perhaps sense in some of the government schemes, the acronyms that we are so fond of in India. Ravi, your 2 minutes start.
Right. No, I think, you know, I'd echo everything Paddy just said, plus, you know, augment with, it's truly a fantastic time to be an entrepreneur in India. You know, and there's good reason for that. One is the world has truly never been as flat as it is today. You know, you could build a company from the coast of India without even having had your passport and sell in 100 countries around the world a product that's downloadable from an app store, and, you know, rake in millions of dollars without having anything but a bank account and an app store account and something that's really delightful, right? That you've built as a team. And that's possible with a single-digit number of employees, and all the resources are there in your hands. I'm just giving you one example of how flat the world is. Second is, India is a huge opportunity in itself, which is we are the largest homogeneous open market in the world. In North America, they worked hard to create NAFTA. In the EU, they worked hard to create the EU, just so that they could have 120, 150 million consumers. In India, we will have that and many, many, many more. You know, literally, we will have a middle class that's at 300, 400 million. A lot of the value that's in savings is getting unlocked, and that's going to come into consumerism. We are going to leapfrog into a digital 4G type environment directly. In the next 36 months, you're going to have 200, 300 million Indians acquire smartphones, and that's conservative. There are other estimates that say it will be even higher. Lots of them will have digital identity, will be financially included, will be transacting on the web. We will have more digital cash exchange in 36 months than any country in the world, practically. Because we will actually skip credit cards for a whole generation. Yep. We will skip the traditional checkbook bank account for a whole generation. And all of that represents opportunity. And it's opportunity for startups. Why? Because the traditional legacy is not going to work. You have to reinvent the future in some sense, right? You have to come and bring new products, new innovation. And that's why right now, from the NASSCOM perspective, where we have created an IT services industry, there's a $120 billion industry exporting out of India today with the largest brands that are world known. I think you will see the same impact happen from India. In the startup ecosystem, in the product ecosystem, in the innovation ecosystem, right? Where we will have a $100+ billion industry at some point. Yep. When we said that about IT services, people laughed. They said, you know, you're at 5 billion, you're at, you know, whatever, single digits, how are you going to get to 100 billion, right? And I think, you know, that's going to happen for sure.
And that was 20 years ago.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, it reflects in our ambition. We've got an audacious name for our program, 10,000 startups, right? 10,000. And our goal at NASSCOM is to positively impact 10,000 startups over the next 10 years and take them to folks like Paddy so they can take them global, folks within India so they can kind of go help them grow. And to your point of policy, I think I look for two things from the government. One is ease of business. I think let's get out of the way in the sense, I don't want government to relinquish its responsibility, but I want it to make it frictionless. I want people to be able to start up, to be able to operate, even shut down as rapidly as they can without any overhead. And you know, towards that end, I have the concept of this green card for startups, which is you get to do anything in the first 3 years below a certain threshold, and you do it with almost no government regulation. So long as you're not impacting anybody else adversely, right? The environment, whatever. And that's, I think, the opportunity, is to, one, provide an ease of business, and then second, a nurturing environment. Better infrastructure, access to capital. And all I mean by access to capital, I don't need the government to write checks. I want the government to make it easy for other people to write checks and to get their money out, right?
Absolutely.
That's the kind of environment we'd like to see.
And I just want to add one of the points that he made about this explosion of mobile broadband that is expected. please remember and focus on the fact that we are already talking about 1 GB of mobile broadband data at $1. And that's a separate subject, but I'm not going to take time on that. Zulfikar, over to you before we open up to the audience.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with Paddy and Ravi both. While one says momentum is already there and nothing can stop it, regulations are important but not as much. It still will happen. Ravi says there's opportunity, and I think both are blending very well together. But if at the same time the regulations are also set right, probably they will become the very good enablers to have the whole momentum go into a different pace. I think, of course, there's a recent study which talks about India having 4 or 5 startups born on a daily basis. Most of them, of course, would fail because of the inherent business model issues or internal functioning issues. But I think challenges do remain with respect to giving them external support. And Indians have time and again demonstrated their ability to deliver successfully. It is thus imperative that we give them an environment, we give them an ecosystem, we give them the entire support that is required so that the next big innovation to the world is delivered from India. And I think while the journey has begun and it is with a lot of force right now, it requires a lot of enablers to keep it on track and have the momentum going. And just on the ease of business of doing in India.
My name is Alok Jha. I look after a European company in India. I also am the personal capacity mentor for e-commerce companies. One of the biggest issues and challenges which I see in the startups is they start with the loans from friends and family. And like Secretary Kant was saying, they end up in the valley of death in the second round because the VCs come in and strangle them. Right. So strangle them in such a way that their vision is lost and they start chasing a VC's dream of capitalization. How do you do entrepreneurial protection in the sense that his vision stays intact?
Okay.
That's a question.
Okay, the question is, how do you create a system which protects entrepreneurship? I hope I got you right, because there was a bit of a disturbance. Who wants to take that?
I'm glad to try and address it. I think it's a complex question. I think there's a lot of transparency in any good ecosystem. Okay, there's lots of peers who come out and speak, they help you, they mentor you. It's not, I don't think you should view, and it's unfair when people view the investor-entrepreneur relationship as something that's adversarial. The best ones work very much synergistically with common goals. Now, if an entrepreneur has a certain vision and they can't sell their investor on it, then they should probably not take that invest. Oftentimes, it's a coalition of whoever's willing.
Most of the time, they don't have a choice.
Yeah, and I think entrepreneurs need to be they need to realize that when you take on VC money, you're signing up for certain sets of goals. If you want to bootstrap your company, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead and do that, build an enterprise that's bootstrapped, and you can then have 100% control. When you take somebody else's money, you lose a little bit of control, and you sign up for certain audacious goals in terms of financial returns in a certain time period, and that's a realistic set of constraints, but the best VCs find ways to nurture their entrepreneurs within those constraints.
You wanted to come in, Paddy?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think early in the development of any ecosystem, you tend to have two trends. You can take America and China as good examples. So firstly, e-commerce tends to dominate in the kind of, let's call it the first wave. And I think in India with Flipkart and many other e-commerce companies, you've seen that. That then attracts, a lot of people get very excited and you begin to attract unsophisticated money or dumb money. And those investors tend, I think sometimes to basically, they misinterpret what their role is as not just mere investors, but also facilitators who nurture the development of that entrepreneur and that company. And you hope that in the second wave, after in the first wave, a lot of that dumb money exits because it gets burnt, because they make silly decisions where they kind of exploit and get rid of the original executives and founders. And what you're seeing in the second and third wave in Silicon Valley, if you look at, there's this incredibly close and positive relationship that is not adversarial between entrepreneurs and between investors. But that does also require an element of transparency in the ecosystem where there's enough of a open feedback loop where people can become aware of aggressive dumb money that basically stifles or kills off not just startups, but gets rid of early entrepreneurs. But that's a trend that's happened everywhere. That used to happen in Silicon Valley an awful lot. So there's nothing unique to it happening.
In fact, I'd add that more investors today, the best investors today, are falling over themselves to become more founder friendly, and advertise themselves as
Sorry,
such.
I just want to add something. So I know, just to answer the question also on protection of the entrepreneur. The protection is from an overall perspective. There's a business perspective to it. There's also a control perspective to it. From a business perspective, I think we spoke in the earlier part of the session on the IPR, the protection rights and all kind of thing. But from an investor perspective, generally it's not only funding, but it's also mentoring along with the funding. And typically, you've seen the startups in the early stages when they have lost too much of control in terms of dilution, maybe because of things like barter, taking services for equity and things like that. At a stage when they actually are taking money and burning money in that sense, the interest levels of the original innovator or the promoter, as you may call it, kind of thing, would substantially go down at that point of time. So it's very, very important to conserve that dilution at the initial stage so that you are remaining much more enterprised for the future.